Hi, this is R-GOnax and we talk about things that don't matter. Deadlock is Valve's first original game since Half-Life. Well, kinda. Sorta. Let me explain. Valve is a game company that's been around for a while, with their latest game being Deadlock, which Valve will not admit as their latest release, because as far as they're concerned, that game does not exist. But hey, that's another can of worms for another time. Regardless, they have been around for a long time, almost 25 years, if not more. They've made many other games, and many of these games that they have made are usually considered as gaming's best of all times in their respective genres. Such beloved classics such as Artifact and Counter-Strike Nexon Zombies. I kid, of course. You know, the usuals: Half-Life, Portal, Counter-Strike, absolute cinema. And the first and original Valve game that they ever made was Half-Life, all the way back in 1998. It was a first-person shooter that completely revolutionized the genre overnight. And I must emphasize the word original. Sure, the game engine was heavily based on id Software's Quake engine that they had released a few years prior, and Half-Life's story is inspired by things such as Stephen King's The Mist or even the original Doom games, but everything as a whole about Half-Life, for the most part, is original. You could trace its origins, its blueprint, if you will, from various books, other video games, and movies. Gabe Newell even said that one of his inspirations about it was Aliens. Unsurprising, have you seen the head crabs? But Half-Life can stand alone on its own merits, as an original IP and product. And now, with Valve's latest game, Deadlock, I think it can do the same thing as well. Valve also loves turning mods into full-fledged games. But what is a mod? Essentially, video game mods, or video game modifications, are player modifications that changes things about a specific game. They can be as small as the player changing the font of text, maybe tweaking the number values of a gun to deal more damage, maybe change the color of a certain outfit or costume a character has, to something extraordinary like total conversion mods, where modders will essentially take the DNA, the game engine of a game, and turn it into something completely different. Mods are one of the greatest things that we as gamers have access to. It's honestly an art form, and the things people have been able to do with these tools, because that's essentially what modding is. It's tools to allow for the creation of new games, new experiences, and Valve is one of the few companies out there that highly encourages their players to do things like modding their games. And as such, Valve's very own Half-Life is no stranger to this. For example, Half-Life is a single-player immersive first-person shooter, and then when a group of modders wanted to turn it into Counter-Strike, the game went from single-player to multiplayer. They adjusted some of the values of the guns, maybe swapped out the models, and then all of a sudden you went from immersive single-player game to competitive tactical shooter game. You see, modders can be anything from a single individual working on their free time to a small group of like-minded developers and gamers. But one universal thing about mod teams is that they are always small. They usually have little to no budget to work with, and the only thing that's fueling the development of whatever it is that they're making, is the love for the game. They are fueled by the passion because what they're doing is something that they genuinely enjoy. And hiring these modding teams into Valve and turning their mods into full-fledged games is one of Valve's favorite methods of hiring new talent and making new products. And for the most part, almost every Valve game after Half-Life falls into this category of mods turned into games. Now listen, whether a game is original by my definition or not, does not take away from the quality or the polish that the game has. You see, Valve hiring these modding teams is a win-win-win situation. It's a win for the small mod teams because now they have the resources of Gaben's bottomless wallet and the support of a company like Valve to make their tiny mod into a fully polished AAA game experience. It's a win for Valve since they know that these mod teams are usually fully dedicated to the creation of their projects. These guys are passionate and they are hungry. They're hungry to create things. And finally, it's a win for us, the gamers, since most of these mods turned games are usually bangers, with many of them being one of the pillars of the gaming world. People have been playing these mod-turned games for almost 20 years. I would know, I'm one of them. There's mods out there, not even made by Valve, that have more love and care than many AAA games have nowadays. Just look at Black Mesa, for example. So again, I just need to stress that me making these comparisons that I'm gonna make in this video is not a diss towards the quality of the games mentioned here. I just think it's very interesting that a company like Valve, given how prolific they are, has relatively few standalone original games, with the first being Half-Life, and after a huge gap of time, Deadlock being another one. But then again, this trend might change in the future. With all the leaks and rumors about Valve making games again soon, we can only hope. So join me, and if you'll allow me, I'll cover which Valve games are these mod-turned games and which ones aren't. Maybe we might learn something new together. Hello Internet Wanderer, my name is R-GOnax and welcome to this video. Apologies for the intro taking up to 5 minutes. There was a lot of ground to cover and I didn't want to lose that viewer retention, you know. Please stop clicking away, it makes me very sad. I hope you enjoy this video enough to do the YouTube things, particularly the subscribe button. It's right there, thank you. And hey, as my channel nears 3,000 subscribers, I thought I'd celebrate by doing a little Q&A to celebrate whenever I hit that threshold. So I'm going to be putting in the video description and in the pinned comment the link to a community post where you can ask all sorts of questions about me and me. I really don't know what else you'd want to ask. What's my favorite color? Blue. There's a freebie for you. Anyway, YouTube things, subscribe. Thanks for watching. Back to the video. Now, Valve has made a lot of games over its history. And in order to make this video a lot more digestible and easier to understand, I won't be covering any of Valve's remakes, ports, and sequels. So games like Counter-Strike Source, Half-Life Source, any of the sequels to their other franchises, I will not be covering in this video. This also includes small games and experiences like The Lab or Aperture Desk Job, because those things were more like experiments or tech demos, so they don't really fit the criteria of what I'm talking about in this video. Think about it like I'm just going to be covering each of Valve's game series as a whole, unless that specific game series has a spin-off that I warrant to be a big enough departure to be its own original game, like in the example of Dota versus Artifact. But enough of that. There are 4 categories that I'm gonna use to classify all of Valve's game series and franchises. And those 4 categories are original Valve games, games inspired by Valve mods, games inspired by outside mods, and finally, and the most subjective and hot take of these categories, heavily influenced by mods, but technically original. Trust me, I'm going to be explaining that last one a lot later in the video. Stay tuned. So I'm going to cover the first category first, original Valve games. This one honestly doesn't need that much to explain about. Half-Life was their first game released in '98. It did all that nonsense without revolutionizing the FPS genre. You already know how it goes. And then the other big contender in this category is Deadlock, which is Valve's latest quote-unquote release that they released this year in 2024. The game is currently in an early playtest, meaning that as far as Valve is concerned, it is not officially released. But nevertheless, it is playable, hundreds of thousands of people are currently playing it, and I think the game, at least as far as the game itself is concerned, it is a finished product. Everything else needs polishing and reworking, but the foundation, the backbone of the game is more or less sound and complete. I'll go into more detail as to why Deadlock belongs in this category and these 2 other games that I'm going to bring up in the 4th category aren't. But again, that's going to be later in the video. Hold your horses. If you want to hate me, that's fine, I deserve it. But let me at least defend myself when the time comes. Actually, before I move on to the next section, I do have a bit of a confession. There is actually one more game that belongs in this category, and it's Artifact. Ooh, it's a Dota 2 spin-off. And while Dota 2, spoiler, belongs in the outside mod turned into a Valve game, Artifact in of itself is technically an original product. It wasn't a mod from another game or a custom game mode or something like that. It's not a sequel, it's not even in the same genre as its parent game. It was made by the original founder of Magic the Gathering, who was hired onto Valve to make the card game. So yeah, that technically makes it an original game. But there's 2 reasons why I'm not going to talk about it further. Number 1, Artifact is Valve's most well-known failure. clear. And number 2, ain't no way I was gonna title the video Deadlock is Valve's first original game since Artifact. Are you kidding me? No one's gonna fucking click that. Next category. Now we have games inspired by Valve mods. Now you see, Half-Life 1 was a very moddable game. It ran on the Gold Source engine, and Valve intentionally made sure that the engine was very configurable and that people could easily access different things about it. This also applies to Half-Life's sequel, Half-Life 2, which ran on the Source engine. Valve just really likes encouraging its players to mod their games. And as such, a lot of Valve games, well, more like the Half-Life games specifically, are very moddable. And then from these 2 games, almost every other game within this category was spawned from. So, in terms of order, we have Ricochet, which was another Valve failure that people don't really like talking about. It was released in 2000, and it was like a multiplayer Tron-style game where you throw discs and kill your opponent. I don't know. Listen, this game does not... I couldn't even play this game if I wanted to. No one plays it, okay? Just take my word for it that it was a mod of Half-Life 1. Valve hired its developers and they made this game and then it failed. But that's okay. People like to ignore that. Next was the actual definitive gold standard of any Valve mod turned game, Counter-Strike. This is a game series that doesn't need an introduction. Now excuse me while I introduce it. Counter-Strike is considered the godfather of all tactical shooters. It's also considered the godfather of esports. It wasn't the first game that people played as an esport, but it was one of those that really pushed esports forward, more so than any other game prior to its existence. There's many videos online chronicling the history and development of Counter-Strike from its days as a Half-Life mod to the juggernaut that it is today, but I won't go into all that. All you need to know is it was a mod of Half-Life. It really shifted the focus from Half-Life, which was a single-player game all about immersion, whereas Counter-Strike is a multiplayer game all about competitiveness. Sometime later in 2004, it got a bunch of sequels that ported it over to the Source engine. It happened twice, and despite being the, 9th, 8th, something game in the franchise, Counter-Strike 2 was officially released last year. So Counter-Strike, needless to say, is a massive success. Another Half-Life mod that, while successful, didn't really garner that much long-term appeal was Day of Defeat, a team-based World War II shooter. There's not much to say about this one. It was officially released in 2003, 1 year before the Source engine was officially released, and it garnered itself a pretty decent player base, enough that 2 years later in 2005 they made a Source port of it. Nowadays, Day of Defeat just kind of coasts by with its very, very small player count, but nevertheless, it was a success, at least in its time. And finally, we have Dota Underlords. This one, surprisingly enough, is not a mod of Half-Life. It was a mod of Dota 2. You see, Dota 2 in its main menu has an arcade tab, where players can directly upload custom games into the Dota 2 client. And sometime around 2018, 2019, there was a custom game mode that was garnering massive popularity. It was called Dota Auto Chess. It was basically the origin point to the auto battler genre itself. If you want to learn more, you should watch these videos right here. Please watch the hour-long one. I spent a lot of time making that video and nobody watched it. Again, I'm being very sad. I spent a lot of time on making that video. Essentially, the game mode popped off. Millions of people logged into Dota just to play it, even though these people had never played a game of Dota in their lives. The game mode was so successful that Valve actually asked the developers if they wanted to make an official release of the game with Valve's funding. The developers, Drodo Studio, surprisingly said no, but gave Valve their full blessing and permission to make their own standalone game. So while technically Underlords is inspired by a Valve mod, Valve actually did not hire the mod team behind Auto Chess. It's more so the modder team declined their offer and Valve went ahead and made their own spin on the genre and of the game itself, which resulted in Dota Underlords. It's the only one that's kind of unique in this category, and I thought that it's really a shame that the game never took off. I really enjoyed it. Again, watch those 2 videos, please. The next category are Valve games inspired by outside mods. This pretty much mimics the other category pretty much to a T. The only difference is these mods came from, well, other games that weren't necessarily made by Valve. I won't be going in order of release, rather I'm gonna talk about these games in terms of how significant they are. So the first one, and the one that a lot of people don't even seem to realize was an outside mod, is Team Fortress. You see, Team Fortress originally started its life as a Quake mod, all the way back whenever Quake came out. I don't know, the world was black and white back then, lead gasoline and all that. You see, Quake had a rather similar philosophy in the whole accepting of player-made mods. Team Fortress is notable as essentially the game in the franchise that started the whole class-based shooter subgenre. With 9 clearly defined and unique classes, it was something that people didn't really think about back then. Everyone back then is essentially the same character. What made them different was the items that they picked up, because everything back then was just deathmatch lobbies. Eventually, as time went on, Valve saw this team and said, hey, why don't you make an official port of this in our game engine? Which they did. Team Fortress Classic, released in 1998, is, chronologically, the second game Valve has ever released. And fast forward many years later, with the release of Team Fortress 2, it is now Valve's most beloved game, I would say. It might not have the biggest player count, it might not make Valve the most money, but I think Team Fortress 2 kind of represents the heart of all of Valve's games. It really showcases what makes Valve as a game company unique in the sense of they can make all of these characters, all of them, all 9 mercenaries with incredibly generic names like The Engineer. And despite how generic they might seem on the surface, they're instantly recognizable. This guy isn't just a soldier, he is the soldier. This guy isn't an engineer, he is the engineer. It just goes to show how incredible Valve is able to polish what essentially was really low polygon character models all the way back in the Quake days. And for a franchise as old as Team Fortress, and specifically Team Fortress 2, this game franchise still has a lot of time left on its hands. I don't think it's going to be going anywhere anytime soon. Bot crisis be damned. The next game on this list is Dota, otherwise known as Defense of the Ancients. Dota is significant in the sense of that it's the first game on this list that technically deviates from Valve's tested MO of making first-person shooters, because Dota is Valve's first attempt at a top-down game. Dota was originally a mod of Warcraft 3, a top-down real-time strategy game made by Blizzard, one of Valve's former rivals. I say former because, let's be real, Blizzard is too busy fighting itself right now to consider fighting other companies. Essentially, it was made by various head developers as time went on. It passed hands with leaderships multiple times as the years went on, and eventually it landed onto the hands of a little head developer that we now know as IceFrog. Fast forward a little bit, and IceFrog was looking for a big company to make an official Dota 2 sequel. He went to various companies such as Epic, he went to Riot Games, he even went to Blizzard. But the only ones that actually gave him the time of day and was willing to hear him out and see his vision to fruition was Valve. Fun fact, Blizzard and Valve actually went through an entire legal battle concerning over who could own the rights to Dota 2. Long story short, they settled out of court with Valve retaining the rights to the Dota name. Blizzard at the time was pretty happy with this, not knowing that they just squandered basically one of the biggest golden gooses in gaming history. It's kind of wild thinking about how Dota could have turned out if Blizzard actually won that court case, huh? I shudder to think about it. Anyway, fast forward to 2011, Dota 2 receives its open beta. A couple of years later, it receives its official release, and now Dota is one of Valve's esports juggernaut. I have spent a decade playing this game. I love Dota. I love IceFrog. I am not biased, I am, and I'm really happy with what Dota was able to do in terms of the esports scene, the MOBA scene, and just gaming in general. It's one of those games that you don't see any marketing for, but anyone even somewhat involved in the gaming community knows exactly what the game is. And all of this started as just a tiny mod in the Warcraft 3 custom game lobbies. Next up, Alien Swarm. Okay, in that last section, I lied. Alien Swarm was released in 2010, a solid year before Dota came out, and technically, this is Valve's first attempt at a top-down shooter. Or I mean, top-down game in general. Not much to say here, honestly. This is another one of those games that Valve likes to pretend that they never made. All that's known about it is that it's a remake of Unreal Tournament 2004. Its developers was, again, hired by Valve. I really don't have much to say because I've never played this, nor will I. If I didn't know any better, this game probably held the record for shortest lived game with aliens for a long time, up until Concord stole that title away from them. I'm sorry, I'm just gonna look for any excuse to make fun of Concord. It's too easy, man, it's too easy. And finally we have Deathmatch. No, that's what it's called. It's called Half-Life Deathmatch, or Half-Life Classic, or Half-Life 2 Deathmatch. I don't know. It was released in 2001, and it was a recreation of the deathmatch mode from id Software's first-person shooter Quake of the same game mode. So technically, this isn't actually even a a mod. This was Valve taking a game mode from another game and releasing it as a standalone game in their game engine. I would reword this entire category, but I've already made the graphics and stuff for this section of the video, so that's fine. It's not like you particularly care about deathmatch, do you? I know who you are. I've seen your Steam libraries. You don't have this game, so you can't say anything. And finally, we have the category that I really wanted to sink my teeth into. The heavily influenced by mods, but technically original. What the hell, Argo? What type of category is that? That makes no sense. Well, strawman voice in my head, why do you keep getting louder? There's only 2 games in this category, and quite honestly, this is, again, the most subjective part of the entire video. So, as such, it's gonna require me to yap the most to explain this entire category. Those 2 games in this category are Portal and Left 4 Dead, and their respective sequels, of course. You see, these 2 games are heavily influenced by mods or projects. Let me explain. Left 4 Dead is the product of a bunch of former Counter-Strike developers playing around in a game mode that they called Terror Strike. Essentially, they would load into a map with a bunch of teammates, and then the enemy team will be completely maxed out with enemy AI opponents, armed with only knives, and they had to fight off this essentially swarm of melee-only enemies. And they liked this concept so much that they worked with the rest of Valve in order to make this whole concept into a full game. And that is how we got Left 4 Dead, which is, to my knowledge, the first major and to this day, best co-op shooter in the market. Many other games have tried to do this whole co-op shooter thing that Left 4 Dead has accomplished all the way back when, but none of these other competitors have ever come remotely close. Maybe Deep Rock Galactic. Portal, on the other hand, technically did not come from a mod as per se, but rather as a college project, namely an experimental game called Jesus Christ. Narbacular Drop? Whatever, that. A team of students from the DigiPen Institute of Technology made it. And it was so unique and innovative with its emphasis on portals and physics puzzle solving that Gaben himself asked the students to become full-time Valve employees and to develop a game that would later become Portal. So Portal is less of a mod turned game, but rather a college experiment turned game. As Drop, that thing, it was not so much a full-fledged game as it was more a proof of concept. Now, this is a part where some of you in the audience might get mad at me for somewhat misleading you with the title of the video. If I wanted to be technical, I could have reworded it and say, Deadlock is Valve's first original game since Half-Life, but Left 4 Dead and Portal kinda count. That's not exactly a title that would roll off the tongue, now would it? Which is something I did to your mom last night. Essentially, my entire argument is that, in my twisted opinion, Portal and Left 4 Dead can trace their direct history to a mod and a college experiment, respectively. Whereas Deadlock is the product of 20 plus years in a genre that has long proven its worth as its own standalone game genre. Sure, you could say that since Deadlock is a MOBA, and MOBA started as a mod, then maybe you could classify Deadlock as inspired by a mod. But 2 things. MOBAs have been around for a very long time now. It's a well-established genre in of itself. Most people playing MOBAs now probably never even knew about its mod history in the first place. In my opinion, MOBAs have long shed its whole mod identity long ago. It is now its own genre. And besides, that's only one half of Deadlock's identity. The other one is that Deadlock is also a hero shooter, which is another tried and true genre as well. If I basically had to make a lineage of influences that resulted in Portal, Left 4 Dead, and Deadlock being made, Portal and Left 4 Dead's path is only one step away from their mod/project of origin, whereas Deadlock is much further down the timeline, and in my opinion, this is what wholeheartedly makes it an original game. And again, this also applies to Half-Life. First-person shooters existed before Half-Life came out, but it's the things that Half-Life did that was revolutionary and that pushed the genre forward. You can make a clear distinction between FPSs that came before and FPSs that came after Half-Life. And I think, maybe, Deadlock will do the same to the MOBA genre and the hero shooter genre as well. Is this cope? Maybe. Is this argument stupid? Definitely. Feel free to disagree with me in the comments below. I actually encouraged it. This is just me trying to justify the fact that I came up with the title of this video and I'm just playing mental gymnastics to justify the title. But there is one thing that I think everyone in the audience can agree, because like I said before, just because a game is a mod or a descendant of a mod doesn't mean it's bad. Far from it. Usually games inspired by mods are usually incredible. I have hundreds, even thousands of hours in these games, and I'm sure a lot of you in the audience have as well. And I'm just happy that we are all collectively enjoying these wonderful games together. Whether you're dicking around in 2 Fort and Team Fortress, experiencing Half-Life for the first time, planting a bomb at B-Site in Counter-Strike, getting your money denied in Deadlock, all of these things that we are experiencing could have only happened if these games had a lot of passion behind them, and they do. And I'm just happy that a company that fosters this much passion, like Valve, is starting to make games again. Whether or not they're original is irrelevant. So, thanks for watching, Internet Wanderer. Apologies if this entire video seemed kinda pointless and lost the plot towards the end, but I don't know. Do you agree with me that Deadlock is Valve's first original game since Half-Life? Or do you disagree? Let's be real, you probably disagree with me, but that's fine. Comment your thoughts in the comment section down below. Anyway, thanks for watching, Internet Wanderer. Do the YouTube things.